Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. I'm super excited about this episode for so many reasons, which I'll get into, because this person I'm going to introduce in 1 second is associated with three things I am super, super passionate about, which is hip hop, Judaism, and cannabis. So without further ado, Lissa Skitolsky, welcome to the show. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And all those things are related, by the way, and we can get into that conversation. And it's certainly not an accident that we are certainly not alone in being Jews who are preoccupied with those three things in particular. It's part of our culture. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be here today.
Well, let's definitely get into that. Before we do, let's go through sort of your origin story. If we can tell people where you grew up, and we'll talk.
Yeah, right now I live in Nova Scotia, and it is everyone has a very interesting and distinct Jewish journey. And in terms of like the Jews, since we're having a hard time lately, yeah. It's a rough moment out there. I do think it's important just to emphasize that Jews are so different, and we have so many different Jewish communities. And I've just spent a life doing Jewish educational outreach because I'm in such awe about Jewish history, confused about how we're still here, right? I think we all are. And I just love hearing the very individual Jewish journeys everyone has in terms of their relationship to like our ethnicity, our traumatic history, whatever relationship they have to the religion, right? Like all of that I find fascinating, and I just like collecting those stories. My own journey has taken me now to Nova Scotia, but
where did you, like, you were born where?
I was born in Washington, D.C., okay. But my family and extended family were all New York Jews who all moved to the Washington, D.C. area like in the 70s and 80s. So they kind of always acted like expats almost, right? Like it's not real culture, it's not real Jews, like we're outside New York. So went back and forth a lot between New York and Washington. I went to a Jewish day school and was like just so inundated with Jews and Jewish history that by the time I got to college, I was just wanted to know how the other people thought, like how non-Jews made sense of everything. So I just wound up majoring in philosophy and taking it farther, and I got a PhD in philosophy. But at the end of the journey, I was like, you know what, the Jews have it right. So then I wound up sort of specializing in Jewish philosophy.
So do you mind if I pause and kind of rewind so we have so we can take it a little bit slower on your trajectory and history? So you grew up in DC. Your parents, I'm assuming, were together, siblings.
Yeah, I should say like family history is not the greatest topic. I'd rather like fast forward through that a little bit.
Well, I'm just curious. I'm just curious on your parents' view of Judaism and what was and how you grew up. And
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
it's a really great question. Like a lot of American Jews, I grew up in a home that was staunchly Zionist, I would say, where support with Israel and identification with Israel was paramount, and where there was a lot of what I would call like Holocaustal consciousness always around, meaning like the Holocaust is almost a filter through which you see and assess everything, right? Like fears and anxieties in like a sort of ever-present way that still like can be negative in terms of like a subtle way that generational trauma gets passed down, right? And some of it's kind of funny, and like I did go to Jewish day school, so we would joke a lot, like a lot of Holocaust humor just to make light of our situation. Like if we would go out to dinner, it was usual for like one of our parents to just put like the rolls on the table into the purse. And it's like, what are you doing? It's like in case the Nazis come while we're sitting. It's like, you know, it's like hard to inherit that. You don't really understand what's happening, right? And so a lot of that confusion. And so I think a lot of Jews like me who go to a Jewish day school wind up focusing on things like what is trauma, right? There are just so many trauma theorists, which I wound up doing. A lot of us do go into philosophy. to just try to compare systems of thought. Oh, my family was Zionist, not so religious, right? So even though my parents didn't like, they both grew up, I would say, somewhere between reform and conservative, which is to say, kind of observant, not, but still going to synagogue like maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and we're both like bar bat mitzvah, right? The idea for a lot of American Jews is we'll give our kids like more of an education than we had, and so they'll know more Hebrew and like know more Jewish history, but like we're all about Israel. So that was sort of the vibe in my house, right? Like at the Jewish day school I went to, it was like we took 5 secular subjects and 5 religious subjects every day. It was like very hardcore studying Talmud. That, so it's like not a yeshiva, right? Because it was a multi-denominational Jewish day school, but kind of felt like a yeshiva in terms of the intensity, right, of the work and the intensity of the academic expectations, which is also very Jewish, right? Which I would also argue is a trauma response. Anyway, I'm really grateful for that education, but that is what, you know, got me interested in philosophy. Did I? So I was bat mitzvahed. We went to synagogue for all the major holidays. I'm trying to answer all the Jewish questions here.
Let me see if I can ask a couple more questions on that. So as a kid, what type of kid were you? Were you sort of into math? Were you into science? And what were you thinking like you wanted to do? What were your interests?
I was so fucking confused. Sorry.
No, you can say fuck as many times as you want. It's encouraged.
It's also just that when I moved to Canada, I had to radically change my language, my discourse. Canadian politeness is a thing. And like if you watch the Trailer Park Boys, I didn't get the joke in America, which is that Canadians find Ricky to be obnoxious and terrible, right? Like you really can't.
I'm from Philly. I grew up in Philly. So
yeah, I love it, and I'm the whole New York Jew. So thank you for giving me permission, but like I actually needed it, right? Like the cultural assimilation and everything. Oh my God, what was the question again?
A question about what growing up, what did you want to like?
I was so
what were your interests?
Confused. I was so fucking confused by all the habits around me, everything people were saying, and also in the 80s there were all these movies that like kind of normalized and made light of things like sibling violence, right? Which I think now we would take much more seriously. And so just the vibe of the 80s made it hard for me to articulate my objection to a lot of what was happening. And so I like spaced the fuck out. Like I was pretty dissociated, to be honest, during the 80s, which is also why I think I have a very natural relation to cannabis, because it's sort of like internalization, turning inwards and finding a way to like drown out the noise. Was just sort of my coping mechanism throughout high school. And like now, and I'm very open about this and I write about it, like I have what's called complex PTSD. So it's not PTSD from one occasion of violence, but it's because the conditions of childhood itself were so emotionally abusive or confusing that you have like a range of symptoms that also change over time, right? And kind of ebb and flow. So it's complicated.
Well, just so I can maybe empathize in a way. I came from an abusive household. So I talked about this, I wrote about this in my book, and my dad was physically abusive, verbally abusive. I grew up with violence, like from friends. I had family members that were violent towards me. I didn't know what is about me that's attracting this violence. And it took me a long time to understand it's nothing to do with me. It's them that they're projecting these things onto me. And because I was able to internalize and be like, be in my room and, found cannabis and listening to music, I withdrew from that and try to, compartmentalize that somewhere. So I kind of understand some of that. Also, I grew up in the 80s and 70s and 80s as well. So I know what you're talking about, and you try to fit in, but your parents really, we say the parents don't understand it, but they really, really did not understand.
So I think they were all spaced. I mean, I know in the case of like when you say it took you a while to understand it wasn't you, I just turned 50 and I like only fully really realized it like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Like it's been so confusing because maybe this was your experience. When I did try to articulate that I was being physically assaulted on a very regular basis, I was either told like it was literally my fault, like I did something to provoke it, or I was told to stop lying. So it's just so devastating and confusing when you're told that over, like there's no, and it just leads to the most like frightening, a life where you never feel very safe, right?
Well, and you also want affirmation from the people who are supposed to be protective of you and love you the most. So my dad, who was that person, we're clear. We had so many conversations. I went to therapy. He came with me. Okay, I can't change the past. There was an acknowledgement and there was a reconciliation, and we move forward. We speak every day. Love my dad, and we're close. My mom, still to this day, is in denial. Oh no, there was a couple thing accident, a couple of things. So that acknowledgement, what I'm seeking, is still missing. So there is still that gap that I have to sort of fill in myself. So yeah, I completely understand what you're talking about.
I also just want to thank you for creating such a safe and comfortable space. Because if you think about it, I started this whole thing by saying, "Can we just fast forward, please?" Like,
I know,
right? Like, what are we
sorry.
like starting with the trauma and the abuse? But like, you create a really safe space, and it is so nice to be able to share this experience with someone. It's rare that that happens, right? Like, especially like on a podcast. So I just want to thank you for that. And also like this seems like a tangent, but it's not, because it's like we're just being Jewish and culture and our feeling and experience right now. Like part of what is so hard, in terms of what like we keep saying like the erasure of sexual genocidal sexual rape against Jewish women, like the erasure of that recently happened. The reason why it's so hard for so many Jewish women right now, because I feel like it's hard for non-Jews to understand why October 7th triggered so many of us and still like shakes us to our core, and it affects us every day. And like we are touching on some pretty intense issues of generational trauma right now. And to maybe explain to other people, like Jewish parents, especially Ashkenazi, that is the remnant of Nazism, tend to have attachment issues or, or real problems because they were emotionally embedded by their parents, who often survived the Holocaust and were in such mourning and grief and trauma, were really not in a position, right, to take. So all of that took me a very long time to figure out. But going back, man, I just lost it. Oh, right, the women. So a lot of Jewish women like me have never been believed, right, about the violence we've suffered. Adding to that is the stereotype of Jewish women as like prissy or nymphomaniac or princess. It's like, I don't know any Jewish bitches like that.
I
Like
never
I get
heard about the nymphomaniac. I must have missed
you have
that.
it. Oh, it's huge. Yeah, yeah, the way those stereotypes work together, it like solidifies that erasure, right? It's like as if sexual violence can't ever happen to us. So that's like one particular way, like in Jewish culture, that October 7th is just triggering the hell out of all of us, right? And that's like one way in which it gets transmitted. And then a lot of people don't know this is not the first erasure, that a lot of people don't think the Nazis raped Jewish women. We now know that's not true. It just took feminist scholars like a decade or 2 decades to like find enough piecemeal evidence to prove that Jewish women were regularly rounded up from the camps, taken into the woods, raped, and then immediately killed. So there were no witnesses. So this is like such a, just like, I don't know, we don't have a word for this kind of crime, right? Where it's like rape to kill or rape being mixed with murder. This is such an awful tangent. I don't mean to be going, I just feel like I'm always doing Jewish educational outreach.
No,
And like,
it makes
very much
total sense.
Cannabis, right? Because like she would have this unique relation, and like one, as you probably know, like Israel has added thousands and thousands of Israelis to its national medical cannabis program in the aftermath of October 7th, because the way so many of us in the Jewish community have always coped with sort of like inheriting this generational trauma that you and I inherited without becoming assholes ourselves, right? Or without becoming like a Larry David who just like goes from like, 0 to rage in 2 seconds all the time, right? Like the way that we don't do that is through like a responsible consumption of medicinal cannabis, right? And so that's one way I'm always trying to convey to people why cannabis has always played a very prominent role in Jewish life, but also like to help provide context for the very Jewish history of like modern cannabis research and advocacy.
I also wanted to sort of combine this whole thing with music, and
Oh yeah.
we'll talk about hip hop a little bit. So for me, being that kid who felt different in my family, like I was the quote unquote black sheep of the family. I used to have long hair and wore like weird things because, and I felt different. I would walk into places and people would whisper. So being in my room, cannabis and music were my connection. That was, so I would stay up and make like actual mixtapes. I would cut the tapes, like tape them together with Scotch tape. We used to do that back in the day. And when I discovered hip hop, I listened to a lot of classic rock and heavy metal and all kinds of different music, but hip hop really connected to me because I started listening to the words. I'm like, I kind of feel that way too. And then I got into movies, Beat Street, Breakin', all that stuff. Like Beat Street was my favorite movie. I was watching it over and over and over. So I'm just curious because, and I want to talk about your book and the work that you did. How does this all fit? I'm trying to make sense of it in my head now that I've been digging into a little bit more of your work. Maybe you can help me kind of explain how this all fit together.
You and I, our subculture of Jews who love hip hop, we're called heapsters. I don't know if you've heard that word before.
No.
Yeah, and it became popular, I guess, in like the early 2000s when people our age, in the like our Gen Xers in the early 2000s, created a brilliant magazine, no longer in circulation, called Heap, Heeb.
Yeah, that one I know.
And it was like and it was actually like funded by Steven Spielberg, because he's really into like unifying Jewish community. It has nothing to do with like if you go to shul, right? And so I've never seen a publication like it. It's sort of what I based and still base my own online publication on, just to give my own shout out. I'm now the editor-in-chief. I went from academia, like a whole life spent doing like PhD philosophy stuff, to being the editor-in-chief of Cannabis Jew magazine at cannabisjew.com. So he was the only like secular Jewish culture magazine targeted at like Jewish secular youth who wanted a way to feel Jewish pride and also flex as Jewish in like mainstream culture but like people wanted to flex Jewish, but like didn't necessarily even know like the Hebrew prayers, but like it did impact their life. Like Jewish identity was important, right? And so like it always featured Jewish celebrities on the front and stuff like that. So we are a subculture. I just wanted you to know that. And the reason we became a subculture is because once hip hop entered the scene, it actually changed the American diaspora forever. And that's why the American diaspora who grew up in the 80s like we did, that's why we're called heapsters. Because we can't separate our Jewishness, our sense of what that means in terms of our responsibility and our commitment, from our love, awe, and real love of hip hop as what helped us cope and like get through life, and also understand something about ourselves and our tradition that we weren't getting at home with all the mishigas happening, right? Mm-hmm. And there is and we now, if you want to pivot to what that connection is, or why Jews resonate so much with hip hop, we can get that to a minute. I will mention that book since you mentioned it. My first book is called Hip Hop as Philosophical Text and Testimony. My next book is for a general audience. This was the first, and I think still the only, academic book in boring academic prose that's ever been published about hip hop. Meaning, in the past, when academics tried to write about hip hop, it was always really offensive. Like they would adopt some like what they thought was hip hop language and like be talking in a slang. Like I wanted to like honor the importance of hip hop as like work and evidence we should be able to cite in academic publications, which when I wrote the book, we weren't allowed to do it. Meaning, when I wrote the book, it was never controversial for me as a Holocaust scholar, which I also am, to cite a Holocaust memoir right, to support a theory I had about the way Nazism worked. But when I wrote the book, it was not allowed, not professional, not valid ever to cite hip hop or hip hop lyrics as testimony to support some theory about how racism worked in the United States, right? So that to me was just such like obvious racist hypocrisy, right? So I just set out to write the book that enabled scholars moving forward to do that. So it wasn't necessarily like a cool or fun book about hip hop. It was just to, and it was also like my mic drop to fucking academia because I knew it was like, I knew I was on my way out. Like, I mean, really, once Trump took over, I was like, I can't. It's like fucking Hitler Youth. Like, I can't do this. And like every other sentence I had to say, the opinions of this professor are not the opinions of my university. Like, it was just a joke, right? So I was like, I knew it wouldn't be so great for my career, but you know, I wound up spending 5 years really immersed with like hip hop communities in Philly actually, and in DC and New York, just interviewing like Black artists and yeah, just doing all the work that, you know, people who aren't Black need to do, right? And like touring, right? I had like a crew and stuff like that. And so, and also just for trying to understand why Jews have always played a prominent role. Oh, and back to the 80s and just our experience of the Jewishness. Like, I don't know what your first, like, holy shit moment was, but like, I was young, right? We were young. And so I was like 11 or 12 when Beastie Boys hit with License to Ill, right? And like, I know that like my son, right, who's 17, thinks like it's all kind of simplistic and silly, like when we listen to License to Ill, but like I still see it as like the deepest shit ever. Like, and especially on like a Jewish level, right? Like, fuck, fight for your right to party. If you want to know the connection between hip hop, cannabis, and Jews, right? Like the Jewish tradition thinks that unlike the Christian or the Greco-Roman tradition, we have a commandment to enjoy all the pleasures our bodies can bring us because that's an honor to God who gave us these pleasures. Like we have a prayer we're supposed to say after every orgasm. It's like hilarious. And you probably know that Talmud requires men, if they have sex with women, to make sure a woman has an orgasm before the man does. Like this is in our Talmud, right? Like our relation of pleasure. And this is why the stigma attached to cannabis has never ever been present in Jewish life and culture in the same way, right? There is a stigma for very different reasons. And so like the whole fight for your right to party, right? Like the war against drugs and all that modern legislation was also an encroachment, right? And discrimination against traditional Jewish medicinal practice. And so here are the Beastie Boys who were like really, really didn't just like they didn't just bring hip hop into the mainstream, which is what they're really credited as. They fundamentally contributed to the sound and form of hip hop. And this is what I argue in my book, and not just the content. Nobody was doing that kind of sampling and that kind of rapid, crazy sampling. Like they basically invented that, which we now just really identify with hip hop, right? So they burst on the scene, fight for your right to party. It's a very Jewish motto. Like that really helped me make sense of our tradition, like against a very dominant worldview, right? Which is all about like repression and pleasure is bad. And like, you know, like even the abortion thing, like if you read our Talmud, we love abortion. Like we think it's awesome. Like we really do. And like we really encourage it in the Talmud, like if pregnancy is giving you a headache, just get rid of it, right? We're like, we don't, and like, that's hard to understand as a Jew, right? And so, honestly, if you want to know the connection, fight for your right to party is deep, right? And so, if now we're talking about the resonance or the synergy between Jewish Americans and African Americans, right? Because I'm never going to say it's like a Jewish genre, right? Because it's solidly and absolutely an African American genre. Like it's how it started, right? Coming out of the testimony of young Black men. But, you know, as you know, I'm just telling your listeners, right? It's so ridiculous to view Jews as a whole as white. My next book is about how ridiculous it is to view Ashkenazi Jews, a remnant of white supremacy, as white. But it's because of that ridiculous view, which is also based on, like, I guess, skin color, which is a racist view of race. But, like, we always forget that Black people and Jewish people really share a very common history, right? In terms of suffering under colonialism. And, you know, Hitler based his entire program for the Jews, right, on the eugenics program in the United States. And one way, and like the first people to really think about what was happening to Jews were like some really famous like Black scholars, right, who were also writing about colonialism at the time. So Aimé Césaire, was pretty adamant to Frantz Fanon in saying that the Holocaust is what happens when colonialism bursts inside of the boundaries of Europe, right? And then who is the target? It's the Jews who have never fit in. We've always been this diaspora people, right? And so we do there are a lot of Black Jews, let's just say that. So it's not even like accurate. It's like a false binary to talk about Black people and Jewish people, very false binary. But like if we're talking just for practical reasons about like Black people who are not Jewish and Jewish people, there's a shared history of genocide, like under white supremacy. And I do think that hip hop allows like Jewish people, Black people to feel that shared history. And in terms of like the form, right, there's like so much in Jewish tradition because we've been subject to like exile and diaspora and like just scattered everywhere. There's like a big tradition of like fragmentation, right, and sampling already, and like our sacred texts, like and of piecing together, and also like fragmented memories. And so it just makes sense to me that in terms of like diaspora and like diasporic rhythms, maybe it just makes sense to me that Jews would not be threatened by like this sort of new form of making music and sampling, but like take to it in terms of something that like in other expressions is already present in the Jewish tradition. I feel like I'm babbling. But
No, you're not bad.
Okay.
I appreciate your
Okay.
view, and I concur and agree. I guess I have a little bit of disappointment with my Black brothers and sisters these days because there's a shift in this connection that I always thought that we had, not only with music, but if I go all the way back, I mean, you talked about, Jewish people aren't necessarily white. They come in all shades of color. And just because I'm ethnically Jewish doesn't mean I'm religiously Jewish. And there's Black Jews in Ethiopia. And if you look at Jah, Rastafarians, that means Yah. That's the word for God in Hebrew, which then was brought to Jamaica, where I believe the origins of hip hop were really in Jamaica and not necessarily in Sedgwick Avenue, even given Kool Herc was Jamaican. But if you really go down, look at the culture in the 60s and 70s in Jamaica, they were already doing hip hop, not exactly the way we listen to it now, but what happened was in hip hop at some point, race, ethnicity, religion, gender started coming into play, and there started to create these divisions, in my opinion, of the lyrics started getting, well, now they're being homophobic, now they're being this, now they're being that. And instead of this unifying force that brought all of us who sort of didn't really fit together because we are connected to that, it created division. And I believe cannabis may have been sort of the glue that kind of kept this all together, because there is a thread of cannabis through hip hop. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the connection between all those with the music, the culture, the cannabis, and how it all fits together in your opinion.
I want to say that there's like a micro and a macro explanation. So, but like, and I agree with everything you just said. So I'm just going to add to it by doing the fancy philosophical stuff, right? So micro and macro, and if I get lost, just remind me of those two words, right? And I'm also like, one thing I really believe, and I will always hold with me from hip hop is like, know where you're from and speak to your experience, right? So like, I'm gonna answer your question, specifically to like with Jews or the Jewish community in hip hop and like and what happened there, right? Like culminating maybe in the Kanye bullshit, right? Like for real. So, but with that question, that's the focus. There's a micro and a macro, which also like both the micro and the macro address everything you just said, just from a different perspective. So one way to think about like what happened between like black rappers and Jewish rappers, or like what used to be like a pretty beautiful harmony or synergy, I would say, like in the early days between like pretty seamless and like production, everything between Jewish artists and black artists is like similar to the problems that you actually have in the cannabis industry, meaning it's precisely because Jews have played an enormously prominent role in the history of cannabis advocacy and research. And it's precisely because Jews have played such a prominent role, right? In the history of, again, not just like the content, but the form of hip hop, that you have this like a space of confusion, which develops into resentment. Because no one knows how to explain that, like what you might call overrepresentation. Yeah, I would, and I'm comfortable saying it's an overrepresentation given how tiny we are. And that also like gives people like a delusional view that like there are so many of us, right? Just want to remind everyone there's like 15 million Jews total in the entire world, right? That's it. But it just feels like, yeah, because there are certain industries that everyone loves that we have played this role. And so that's the micro. And then to even fill that out, you start getting into the macro that you were addressing, which is like, what up with Jews and race? And so I started this question years ago, but I couldn't fully answer it until I got to Canada, only because the American view of race is so fucked and different from other countries. And I didn't know that until like I lived somewhere. And not like a totally different country. Like you think Canada would be the exact same. It's totally different. Like in terms of how people see race and understand race. In the United States, it's like this ingrained decision you make when you look at someone's skin color. Like you don't really, you're just like trained like, and it's like if it's uh the tone a little bit more to like one side, it's like a very quick, a very binary decision that's like really dehumanizing, but we're like completely unaware of it, right? And also, I studied philosophy of race, and like the first thing that you learn when you study race is like a concept or a category is like everyone knows it's a construct that was invented in the 18th century. You know that like discursively, but you forget what that means, which is that it doesn't mean anything other than a word or a category used to categorize. So anytime you're like making judgments about what someone's race is by the color of their skin, that's a racist understanding of what race is, right? So when we talk about what race means as just a category, as like a box that you have to check on a form, like why do we have this designation? What's its use? The answer is it designates whether you are a member of a group that has historically been racialized in one way or another as lesser than white. Right? So if you are a people that was racialized, right, and like suffered like genocide, right? That like that's why so you know there's this debate whether we should even have race, but there's this new school of thinking about race, which I really like, that was championed by someone that used to be my colleague here named Chike in Canada, Chike Jeffries. His theory, called the constructivist theory of race, is that we're still going to have racial identity if racism disappears, because we don't just need to talk about a certain mode of oppression. It helps groups that have been racialized inherit their traumatic history with a sense of pride and having overcome it. So the word black was originally not a source of pride. It's the word that was actually used to racialize a group of people that we kidnapped, right, as from Africa as lesser than white, right? But now if you think about like why we like what it means to be black, it's a source of pride. It's how you inherit and transform what was like a negative term into like a source of cultural pride. So here you start to see the problems with why Jews have such a problem with pride, right? Is because we were racialized by Ashkenazi Jews, and the only Jews that get called white ever, because we have three ethnicities. Let's explain this to your listeners. There are Sephardic Jews, right? Ashkenazi Jews, which you and I are predominantly, hail from Eastern Europe. Sephardic Jews like Spain and Portugal. And Mizrahi Jews, like kind of from everywhere else, but like largely Africa, right? And the Middle East. Ashkenazi Jews, ironically, are the only Jews white enough ever to be called white. And we are not the majority. Even though, because of racism, people think all Jews are white. White Jews are not the majority of Jews in the world, or Jews that you would see as white and call white are not the majority, right? And so the only Jews that pass as white are those that ironically were the only Jews of all the three ethnicities actually targeted for complete destruction by the Nazis for being racial imposters and a mortal threat to white purity. So like when we talk about Jewish self-loathing, like, do you fucking blame us? Like, look at the fucking shit we're hanging up in our, like, we know ourselves to be Ashkenazi Jewish is to literally know yourself as a remnant, sort of like a tiny remnant of a group that was completely destroyed because of white supremacy, and not just by the Nazis, right? We have to remember that the Holocaust was a European-wide effort. It was like a program that European leaders agreed to together as a great idea over drinks. They like cling to the final solution. And I'm not making that shit up. That shit really happened, right? Clinked over drinks. Yes, let's do this thing. Let's do this final solution. Let's go. Like that shit really went down, right? So this European effort. So we know that about ourselves, and yet everyone else is telling us we're white with white privilege, which on the one hand, we can pass as white, which has some privilege, but we don't always. And then there are times when like Jews are killed in a synagogue, right? We don't know how to make all of this, right? So the macro thing is that, and this is my next book called White Jew, is my first book for the general audience. Very excited, coming out with Indiana University Press. My theory is that the term white Jew is a conceptual paradox that literally makes no fucking sense. And what it does is put every Jew who's called a white Jew in a position, it actually puts everyone in a position of choosing between our, like the ethnic pole of our identity and the racial, because they are totally incompatible. Meaning, if my race is white, I am not and have never been a member of a group that has been racialized as lesser than white. On the other hand, if I'm Ashkenazi Jewish, I am that remnant of white supremacy, right? This is why we still appear to everyone, just the phrase white Jew, to be hiding something, deceiving people about our identity. So we're either the white people behind the curtain secretly controlling everything and denying that we're white, and that's kind of the Kanye vision, and that's to choose the white side of us. Or if it's like they will not replace us, they're not white, they're pretending to be white, they're just Jews, they've always been Jews, right? Like, either way, my theory is that it's precisely this, like, fucked up view. Like, and I wasn't at that meeting, I don't know who came up with it, but it is this, like, conceptual paradox of the white Jew that is one factor that leads to this repetition and reproduction of anti-Semitic paranoia, and really the reproduction of